Private Daniel Reynolds had seen terrible things during the war, but nothing prepared him for what he found that September morning in 1945. Inside a makeshift prison camp on the outskirts of what remained of Hiroshima, a young Japanese woman sat alone in the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. When Reynolds approached to offer medical assistance, she recoiled violently, tears streaming down her face. She repeated the same phrase over and over. "Please do not touch me. It burns." "It burns when you touch it." Reynolds stopped, confused. There was no visible wound, no blood, no obvious injury, but her terror was real. What he was about to discover would shake him to his core and reveal one of the war's most horrifying hidden tragedies. The date was September 15th, 1945. World War II had officially ended just weeks earlier with Japan's surrender on August 15th. American forces were now conducting occupation operations across the Japanese archipelago, including the devastated cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Private Daniel Reynolds, a 23-year-old medic from Ohio, had been assigned to a unit tasked with processing prisoners of war and providing humanitarian aid to displaced civilians. His platoon arrived in the Hiroshima region expecting to find military prisoners, but what they encountered was far more complicated. The camp was located in a partially destroyed factory building on the city's eastern edge, about 3 miles from ground zero of the atomic blast that had occurred on August 6th. The structure's concrete walls still stood, though the roof had collapsed in sections, exposing the interior to the elements. Inside, approximately 40 Japanese civilians huddled in small groups. Most were women, children, and elderly men. They had been gathered here by retreating Japanese military forces in the chaotic final days of the war, though the reasons remained unclear. Were they prisoners? Refugees? Conscripted laborers? The answer seemed to be all three. Sergeant Robert Henderson, Reynolds' commanding officer, approached the situation with typical military efficiency. Check them for weapons, provide basic medical screening, document their identities, and arrange transport to proper civilian facilities. It should have been routine, but nothing about Hiroshima was routine anymore. The city that once housed 350,000 people had been reduced to ruins in an instant. The atomic bomb, a weapon beyond anything the world had previously known, had killed an estimated 70,000 people immediately. Tens of thousands more died in the following weeks from burns, injuries, and radiation sickness. The survivors wandered through a landscape that resembled hell itself. Reynolds moved through the camp methodically, checking each person for signs of malnutrition, disease, or injury. Many showed effects of the blast even from miles away. Burns, lacerations from flying glass, respiratory problems from inhaling ash and debris. He treated what he could with his limited supplies, making notes for more serious cases. Then he saw her, a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, sitting apart from the others against the far wall. She wore a tattered gray dress that might have once been part of a nurse's uniform. Her black hair was cut short, practical rather than stylish. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. But what struck Reynolds most was her posture. She sat with her arms crossed over her chest, hands gripping her own shoulders as if trying to hold herself together physically. Reynolds approached slowly, holding his medical bag where she could see it. He had picked up a few Japanese phrases during his training. "I am doctor. I help, not hurt." The woman looked up at him with an expression mixing fear and resignation. She said nothing. Reynolds gestured to his medical supplies, then to her, trying to convey his intent to examine her. The woman shook her head violently, pressing herself harder against the wall. "Please no," she said in broken English. "Please not touch." Reynolds paused, uncertain. He could see no obvious injury, but her distress was genuine. Perhaps she had been assaulted. Such things happened in war, and Reynolds knew that victims often reacted with extreme fear to any physical approach. He called over to Kenji Watanabe, the Japanese-American interpreter assigned to their unit. Watanabe was a Nisei, born in California to Japanese immigrant parents. He had spent the early war years in an internment camp before being recruited for military intelligence service. His loyalty had been questioned, tested, and ultimately proven through his work in the Pacific Theater. Now he served as a crucial bridge between occupying forces and Japanese civilians. Watanabe approached and spoke gently to the woman in Japanese. She responded haltingly, her voice barely above a whisper. After several minutes of quiet conversation, Watanabe turned to Reynolds with a troubled expression. Her name is Emiko Ishikawa. She was a civilian nurse in Hiroshima. She was at the Red Cross hospital when the bomb fell. Watanabe paused, choosing his words carefully. She says she has an injury, but she is afraid to let anyone see it or touch it. She says it burns. Reynolds frowned. Burns should be treated immediately, especially if they were over a month old. Infection would be a serious risk. Tell her I need to examine her. I can help with pain and infection, Watanabe translated. But Emiko shook her head again, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. She spoke rapidly in Japanese, her voice rising with emotion. Watanabe listened, his expression growing more grave. She says the burn is not like normal burns. She says it does not heal. She says when people touch her skin, even gently, it feels like fire, like being burned again. She is afraid of the pain. Reynolds had heard about radiation effects during his brief training on atomic weapons, but the information had been limited and theoretical. The bomb was new. Its long-term effects were unknown. Medical officers speculated about radiation sickness, but concrete data was scarce. Reynolds knew the basics: nausea, hair loss, bleeding, susceptibility to infection. But pain from touch? That was not something he had been briefed about. Let me see, Reynolds said through Watanabe. I will not touch. Just look. After more gentle persuasion, Emiko finally agreed. Her hands trembled as she slowly extended her left arm. She rolled up the sleeve of her dress with obvious difficulty, wincing with each movement. Reynolds leaned closer, and what he saw made his breath catch. The skin of her forearm and hand was discolored, mottled with patches of red, purple, and sickly yellow. The texture was wrong, somehow both rough and fragile looking, like paper that had been burned and then soaked. In some areas, the skin appeared to be peeling away in thin layers. But there was no active bleeding, no pus, no signs of typical infection. It looked like a burn, but also like nothing Reynolds had ever seen. How did this happen? Reynolds asked. Watanabe translated the question. Emiko closed her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was flat, emotionless, as if recounting someone else's story. I was in the hospital basement when the flash came. The building shook. Everything fell. I was trapped under rubble for hours. When I finally got out, the city was on fire. The sky was dark. There was a strange rain, black rain, sticky and warm. It got on my skin, my clothes. I tried to wash it off, but there was no clean water. Everything was contaminated. By evening, I started to feel sick. My skin began to burn where the rain had touched it. At first, I thought it was from the heat, from fires, but it got worse. The skin started to change, and the pain never stopped. Black rain. Reynolds had heard other survivors mention it. After the atomic explosion, a strange dark precipitation had fallen on parts of the city, particularly to the northwest of Ground Zero. Scientists would later determine that this rain was heavily contaminated with radioactive fallout. Ash and other debris sucked up into the massive mushroom cloud and then dropped back to Earth. Anyone caught in the black rain had been exposed to significant radiation. Emiko continued speaking, and Watanabe translated. For weeks I tried to hide it. I wrapped my arms in cloth. I did not let anyone see. Other people were dying all around me. People with no injuries, no burns, just dying. Their hair falling out, bleeding from inside. I thought I would die too, but I did not die. I just hurt. Reynolds sat back on his heels, his mind racing. This was beyond his training, beyond anything in his medical bag. He needed to get her to a proper hospital, to doctors who were studying radiation effects. Can you move? Can you walk? He asked. Emiko nodded. I can walk, but please, do not make me go where there are many people. They will want to examine me. They will touch me. I cannot bear it. Reynolds looked up at Watanabe. We need to get Dr. Caldwell. She is working at the field hospital near headquarters. If anyone can help, she can. Watanabe nodded and hurried off to find transport. While they waited, Reynolds stayed with Emiko, maintaining a respectful distance. He tried to keep her talking, partly to assess her mental state, partly to understand more about what had happened. Through Watanabe, who returned after arranging transport, Emiko told her story. She had been 24 years old when the bomb fell, trained as a nurse at Hiroshima City Hospital. When the war intensified, she had been conscripted into service at the Red Cross Hospital, one of the larger medical facilities in the city. On the morning of August 6th, she had been in the basement supply room, taking inventory of rapidly dwindling medical supplies. That location, below ground and shielded by the hospital's thick walls, had saved her life when the bomb detonated approximately 1 mile away. The atomic bomb, nicknamed Little Boy by its American creators, had exploded at an altitude of about 1,900 feet above the city center. The blast generated temperatures estimated at several thousand degrees at ground zero. The thermal radiation ignited fires across the city. The shockwave flattened buildings for miles. But Emiko, sheltered in the basement, had survived the initial blast. The hospital above her was destroyed, but the basement structure held. She spent hours digging through rubble, finally emerging into an unrecognizable world. The hospital she knew was gone. The city she knew was gone. Fires burned everywhere. People wandered in shock, many horribly burned, some with their clothing burned away, their skin hanging in strips. Emiko had tried to help, falling back on her medical training, but there were too many injured, too few survivors who could help, and almost no supplies. Most of the doctors and nurses had been killed. Those who survived worked until they collapsed. And then the black rain came, falling in large drops that left dark stains on everything they touched. Emiko had been so focused on trying to treat a burned child that she had not immediately sought shelter. The rain soaked through her clothes, covered her arms and hands. Only later, when she finally stopped moving, did she realize something was wrong. The burning sensation started that night. By the next day, her skin began to show discoloration. Within a week, it looked as it did now. The truck arrived and Reynolds helped Emiko to her feet without touching her. She moved slowly, clearly weak from malnutrition and prolonged pain. The journey to the field hospital took 30 minutes through streets still choked with rubble. Dr. Sarah Caldwell was waiting when they arrived. She was a 40-year-old physician from Massachusetts, one of the relatively few female doctors serving in the Army Medical Corps. She had volunteered for Pacific duty specifically to treat atomic bomb survivors, driven by a combination of medical curiosity and humanitarian concern. She met Reynolds and Emiko at the entrance to the medical tent. Dr. Caldwell listened as Reynolds explained what he had observed and what Emiko had told him. The doctor's expression was serious but calm. She had seen many radiation injury cases over the past month, though each one presented unique challenges. Emiko, this translated through Watanabe. I need to examine you. I understand that you are in pain. I will be as gentle as possible, but I must see the extent of your injuries to help you. Emiko looked at the female doctor, perhaps finding some reassurance in dealing with another woman. She nodded slowly. Dr. Caldwell directed her to a private examination area screened off from the main ward. The examination took nearly an hour. Dr. Caldwell documented everything meticulously. The radiation burns covered approximately 30% of Emiko's body, primarily her arms, hands, upper back, and parts of her face and neck, all areas that would have been exposed to the black rain. The skin showed signs of acute radiation dermatitis, a condition that was only beginning to be understood in medical literature. The radiation had damaged the skin cells at a fundamental level, interfering with their ability to regenerate normally. This explained the strange texture and discoloration. More concerning was the extreme tactile hypersensitivity. Even the lightest touch caused severe pain, as if nerve endings had been damaged and left in a permanent state of hyperreactivity. Dr. Caldwell also found other signs of radiation exposure. Emiko's gums showed signs of bleeding. Her white blood cell count, when tested, was abnormally low. She had lost weight not just from food scarcity, but from ongoing nausea. These were all consistent with radiation sickness. But Emiko had survived the acute phase. She was now dealing with chronic effects, something that medical science was only beginning to document. After the examination, Dr. Caldwell sat down with Emiko, Reynolds, and Watanabe to discuss the findings. The news was mixed. You have survived the initial radiation exposure, which many did not. Your body is fighting, but it has been severely damaged. The skin may heal somewhat over time, but the damage is deep. The pain may lessen, but it may never completely go away. I can provide medications to help manage the pain and prevent infection, But I cannot undo what has been done. Emiko listened without expression. She had already accepted that her life had been fundamentally changed. Will I die from this? She asked through Watanabe. Dr. Caldwell chose her words carefully. You could. Radiation exposure increases your risk of cancer and other diseases. Your immune system is compromised, making you vulnerable to infections. But you have already survived longer than many. With proper care, you may have many years ahead. They may not be easy years, but they will be yours. Emiko nodded. Thank you for your honesty. Reynolds watched this exchange and felt a profound shift in his perspective. He had been trained to see the Japanese as the enemy, as an abstract threat to be defeated. But Emiko was not abstract. She was a nurse who had been trying to help injured people when the world exploded around her. She was a victim of the same war that had sent Reynolds across the ocean, but she had suffered in ways he could barely comprehend. Over the following days, Reynolds found himself returning to the field hospital to check on Emiko's progress. Dr. BQ. Caldwell had started her on a treatment regimen that included pain medication, antibiotics to prevent infection, and nutritional supplements to help her weakened body. The doctor also took extensive photographs and notes, contributing to the growing medical documentation of atomic bomb effects. This information would prove crucial in treating future radiation exposure cases, though Reynolds and the others did not yet know that they were documenting evidence that would shape nuclear policy and medical practice for decades. Emiko slowly began to open up about her experiences. Through Watanabe, she described the days and weeks after the bombing in detail, the overwhelming number of casualties, the makeshift morgues where bodies were stacked because there was no way to bury them all, the desperate searches for family members among the dead and displaced, the gradual realization that the city would never be rebuilt as it was, that the old Hiroshima was gone forever. She talked about the other nurses and doctors who had died, either in the initial blast or from radiation sickness in the weeks that followed. She described watching people who seemed to have survived the blast suddenly falling ill, their hair falling out in clumps, bleeding from their gums and noses, dying from invisible damage inside their bodies. The stories haunted Reynolds. He had celebrated when news of the atomic bomb had reached American forces in the Pacific. It meant the war would end. It meant he and his buddies would not have to participate in an invasion of the Japanese home islands, an operation that military planners estimated could cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. The atomic bomb had been presented as a terrible but necessary weapon, one that had shortened the war and saved lives in the long run. Reynolds had accepted this narrative without question. But sitting with Emiko, hearing her describe the reality of that weapon's effects, he found his certainty wavering. The bomb had ended the war, yes. But at what cost? How many Emikos were there? People whose suffering would last not days or weeks, but years or decades. Sergeant Henderson visited the hospital one afternoon and found Reynolds sitting outside the tent where Emiko was resting. The sergeant was a practical man, not given to philosophical reflection. He looked at his young medic and frowned. You are spending a lot of time here, Reynolds. We have work to do back at camp. Reynolds looked up at his sergeant. I know, sir. But this feels like the most important work I have ever done. Understanding what happened here, bearing witness to it. Henderson was quiet for a moment. Then he surprised Reynolds by sitting down beside him. I heard about the woman with the burns. Heard she cannot even be touched without terrible pain. That true? Reynolds nodded. It is true. The radiation damaged her skin so badly that even gentle contact feels like fire to her. Henderson swore softly. What a thing. What a terrible thing. The two men sat in silence for a while. Then Henderson spoke again. You know, Reynolds, I have been in this man's army for 15 years. I fought in the Philippines. I have seen men die in every way you can imagine. But this atomic business, it is different. It is not just about who wins the battle. It is about what we are willing to do to win. Reynolds looked at his sergeant with new respect. I keep thinking about all the things we were told, that the Japanese were fanatics who would never surrender, that invading Japan would cost 1 million American lives, that the bomb was the only way. And maybe that is all true, but it does not make this any easier to look at. Henderson nodded. War is full of choices between bad and worse. The trick is living with whichever choice gets made. We did not drop the bomb, you and me, but we are here dealing with what it did. Best we can do is help people like that nurse and remember what we have seen. As September turned to October, Emiko's condition stabilized. The pain medications helped, though they could not eliminate her suffering entirely. Her wounds remained largely unchanged, the damaged skin neither healing properly nor deteriorating further. Dr. Caldwell made arrangements to transfer her to a specialized treatment facility that was being established to study and treat atomic bomb survivors. The work being done there would eventually contribute to the founding of the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, an organization that would study survivor health effects for decades. Before Emiko left, she asked Watanabe to help her speak with Reynolds one final time. "Private Reynolds," she said through the interpreter, "I want to thank you. You were the first person since the bomb who saw my injury and did not look away. You did not treat me as a monster or a curiosity. You saw me as a person who needed help." Reynolds felt his throat tighten. "I am sorry for what happened to you. I am sorry for all of it." Emiko shook her head. "You did not drop the bomb. You did not start the war. You are just a young man who was sent to fight. Like the Japanese soldiers who died here were young men sent to fight. The men who make wars are old and safe. The people who suffer in wars are young and vulnerable. This is always true." Reynolds thought about her words. "Is there anything I can do for you? Anything at all?" Emiko was quiet for a moment. "Tell people what you saw here. Not just about me, but about all of us. Tell them that the people who died here were not just numbers. They were teachers and students, shopkeepers and factory workers, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters. They were people with lives and dreams and fears. The atomic bomb did not just destroy buildings, it destroyed futures. It created suffering that will last generations. Tell them that, so perhaps they will think carefully before using such weapons again." Reynolds nodded slowly. "I will tell them. I promise." Emiko smiled. A small, sad smile. "Then some good will come from my pain. That is enough." Emiko Ishikawa was transferred to the specialized facility on October 10, 1945. Reynolds never saw her again, but he kept his promise. After the war, he returned to Ohio and became a family doctor in a small town. He spoke about his experiences in Hiroshima whenever asked, describing what he had seen and learned. In the 1960s, when nuclear weapons testing became a major political issue, Reynolds wrote letters to newspapers and testified before a congressional committee about the long-term effects of radiation exposure. He described Emiko, the nurse whose skin had become so damaged by radioactive rain that even a gentle touch caused agony. His testimony helped shape public understanding of nuclear weapons effects. Dr. Sarah Caldwell continued her work with atomic bomb survivors for several more years before returning to the United States. She published numerous medical papers on radiation effects, contributing to the development of treatment protocols that would help future radiation exposure victims. She never forgot Emiko and the other patients she treated in those early months after the bombings. Sergeant Henderson served another 5 years in the Army before retiring. He rarely spoke about the war, but he kept a small photograph in his wallet. It showed the ruins of Hiroshima from a hillside, the devastated city spreading out below. He looked at it sometimes when the news showed stories about nuclear weapons development, a reminder of what those weapons actually meant. And Emiko Ishikawa, historical records suggest she survived at least into the 1950s, living with chronic pain and health problems, but continuing to share her story with medical researchers. She became one of thousands of hibakusha, the Japanese word for atomic bomb survivors. These survivors faced not only physical suffering but social stigma, as many Japanese feared that radiation exposure made them somehow contagious or damaged. Many hibakusha hid their status to avoid discrimination, but some, like Emiko, chose to speak out, to ensure that their suffering would not be forgotten or repeated. Their testimonies became crucial historical documents, reminding the world of the human cost of nuclear warfare. The meeting between Private Daniel Reynolds and Emiko Ishikawa lasted only a few days in the autumn of 1945, but its impact rippled forward through the decades. It was a reminder that behind every statistic of war, behind every casualty number and strategic decision, there are individual human beings with their own stories of survival, suffering, and resilience. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed an estimated 210,000 people by the end of 1945. Tens of thousands more died in subsequent years, from radiation-related illnesses. These numbers are important to remember, but so are the individual stories, like that of a young nurse whose skin was so damaged by radioactive rain that even the gentlest touch felt like fire. The development and use of atomic weapons marked a turning point in human history, the moment when humanity gained the power to destroy itself on a previously unimaginable scale. In the decades since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, no nuclear weapons have been used in warfare, though tens of thousands remain in military arsenals around the world. The testimonies of survivors like Emiko Ishikawa have played a role in maintaining the nuclear taboo, the international consensus that these weapons should never be used again. Their stories serve as powerful reminders of what nuclear war actually means in human terms, not abstract calculations of strategic advantage or political leverage, but burned skin that never heals, pain that never stops, futures that never arrive. Private Reynolds' encounter with Emiko also illustrates a broader truth about war and humanity. In war, we are trained to see enemies as abstract threats, as others who are fundamentally different from ourselves. This psychological distance is necessary for soldiers to do their jobs, to fight and kill when ordered. But when you actually meet the people on the other side, when you hear their stories and see their suffering, that distance collapses. You are confronted with the uncomfortable reality that they are human beings much like yourself, caught up in the same terrible machinery of war. This recognition does not erase the political or military realities that led to conflict, but it complicates them. It makes moral judgments more difficult. It raises questions that have no easy answers. Was the atomic bombing of Hiroshima justified? Historians, ethicists, and politicians continue to debate this question more than 75 years later. Those who defend the decision point to the brutal nature of the Pacific War, the fanatical resistance Japanese forces had shown on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and military estimates that invading the Japanese home islands could cost hundreds of thousands or even millions of lives on both sides. They argue that the atomic bombs, despite their horrific effects, actually saved lives by forcing a quick Japanese surrender. Those who criticize the decision point to the massive civilian casualties, the long-term suffering of survivors, the fact that Japan was already essentially defeated by August 1945, and the possibility that alternatives like a demonstration bombing or continued conventional warfare might have achieved surrender without using atomic weapons on cities. These debates will likely continue as long as people study history, but what cannot be debated is the reality of what happened to people like Emiko Ishikawa. The atomic bombs caused suffering on a scale that defies imagination. They created new forms of injury and illness that medical science had never encountered. They left survivors marked not just physically but psychologically, carrying memories of apocalyptic destruction that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Whatever one's position on the strategic necessity of the bombings, the human cost demands acknowledgement and remembrance. The people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not just casualties of war. They were individuals with names and faces and stories, people who deserved to live and who suffered terribly because of decisions made by leaders they had no control over. This is why Private Daniel Reynolds' promise to Emiko was so important. Tell people what you saw here. Tell them that the people who died here were not just numbers. By keeping that promise, Reynolds ensured that at least one victim's story would be remembered and shared. He helped preserve the human dimension of a historical event that is often discussed in abstract terms of military strategy and political necessity. His testimony, like those of other witnesses to the atomic bombings, serves as a moral anchor, reminding future generations that weapons of mass destruction have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate strategic objectives they are meant to achieve. The story of Emiko Ishikawa and her hidden injury is ultimately a story about the costs of war and the importance of bearing witness to suffering. It is about a young American medic who encountered a Japanese nurse and saw not an enemy, but a fellow human being in terrible pain. It is about a doctor who treated each patient with compassion regardless of nationality. It is about a translator who bridged linguistic and cultural divides to enable understanding. It is about a survivor who chose to share her story despite the pain it caused her, because she hoped her suffering might prevent future suffering. These acts of compassion, communication, and courage did not change the course of history. They did not undo the damage of the atomic bomb, but they affirmed something essential about humanity even in the midst of warfare's worst horrors. They demonstrated that empathy and understanding can survive even in the darkest circumstances, and that these qualities offer the best hope for preventing such horrors from happening again. Today, when we think about nuclear weapons, we often think in terms of megatons and delivery systems, deterrence theory, and strategic balance. These technical and strategic considerations are important, but we must never lose sight of what nuclear weapons actually do. They burn, they poison, they destroy, they create suffering that lasts not just moments or days, but years and decades. They inflict injuries so severe that even the gentle touch of a helping hand feels like fire. Emiko Ishikawa's hidden injury, the burned skin that could not bear to be touched, stands as a powerful symbol of the lasting damage these weapons cause. Her story, preserved through the testimony of Private Daniel Reynolds and others who knew her, ensures that we never forget the human face of nuclear warfare. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to our channel to hear more untold stories from history. Leave a like if you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What lessons do you think we should draw from the experiences of atomic bomb survivors like Emiko Ishikawa? How can we ensure that such weapons are never used again? Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people. Thank you for watching and for remembering.